Welcome back.
Yeah, we're live again. We're a little bit late this time.
Well, not like we're broadcasting this live, so it doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah. There's a lot that's happened because we skipped a week. Was the reason that there wasn't enough happening, or why did we skip?
No, the main reason is that if I recall correctly, I was in Berlin and had a shitty hotel connection.
Fair point. But let's get into it. There's a lot of stuff that's happened. So we had Luna 2.0, which
Yes.
I mean, we got to touch on that, right? There was that great blog post from Arthur Hayes,
Oh yeah.
the ex Bitmex CEO. Obviously very controversial figure, but I do like his writing. Like he's he's got a very distinct style of writing, which like I sort of from even almost like a literature standpoint, like enjoy. And then he is also very like ultra capitalist pragmatic, which while I am not like that at all, sort of ideologically, I do appreciate that perspective can sometimes lead you to conclusions that are a bit more clear and easy to understand, which he then obfuscates in very colorful language, of course.
I, I don't think necessarily of obfuscated as much. He just like his long-winded intros, basically. And I agree. He's a character and he has a history, and I would not necessarily trust them not to sell my organs for spare parts if he's given half a chance. But that makes it an interesting counterpoint to my own perspective, and he does seem to look at things with eyes wide open.
Yeah. Well, besides when it comes to whether he should implement KYC at Bitmex.
Well, I guess he was optimizing for different things back then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're of the generation. So I met Arthur and I think Sam was the other founder back in like 2013 or something. Met him a few times along the way. And I think their whole like that whole generation of sort of financially oriented crypto founders, they're all like cowboys. And cowboys, I mean, I don't mean cowboys as in they herd cows. I mean like gunslingers, like you know,
In Wild West types.
exactly, like showdown on the main street kind of stuff. And so it doesn't surprise me too much. But when it comes to these kinds of things, and I think we might see similar things related to Luna. I don't know, but it's happened a few times, right? There's been these like significant pieces that have then people have gone pretty Wild West approach on them. EOS being another example, right? And every time it sort of hurts me, but I do feel like because in the thick of it when it's happening, like these guys are absolutely insane. Like the SEC is gonna come down hard. It's gonna be all Kim.com, like they're gonna fly in with choppers and shit. Um, but then the reality is they just like pay a small fine and everything's fine, pretty much, right? So maybe if your ethics allows for that kind of thing in this very constrained sort of universe, which mine would not, but if it does, maybe they're actually being quite intelligent. In the BetMEX case, though, I would argue that they could have been a lot bigger had they been a bit more conservative. Like it's just a matter of timing, right? Like I think they could have been, FTX, which now is FTX.
Yeah, I think that either way I would have made out of it quite okay. So likely not too concerned on that side. The thing is, this is one of those things where if you're gonna roll the dice, at least be early about it, right? Hayes got off with what seems to be like a slap on the wrist for intents and purposes. It was a different climate. I'm not sure that the next founder on the current climate that goes through something like this will not get the book thrown at them. I mean, they're prosecuting what's his face from OpenSea for insider trading for fucking flipping JPEGs, right? And whether that
And it
qualifies as insider. Hmm?
and it's not an insider trading charge. The OpenSea case, it's actually a good topic to discuss because it's kind of crazy. It's a wire fraud charge.
Is it wire fraud? I thought it was insider trading.
No, it's sort of like marketed as insider trading, but obviously there were no insider trading laws about flipping JPEGs. So it's being positioned as wire fraud. I haven't looked into it too closely, but it's very
Some of the things,
strange.
some of the things that I've read is that while there are no laws about JPEG specifically, there is some precedent about basically acting while financially benefiting from material non-public information, even if you're not a public company. So that seemed to be what they were saying would apply here. Like I said, I don't know nearly enough, but the point is that this guy is getting the book. Nate is getting the book thrown at him, right? I think that Arthur again got off relatively easy, and he probably has a shit ton of money to afford some sensational O.J. Simpson style lawyers, right? Probably Nate does not, because hey, JPEGs do not pay as well as an exchange. So I don't
JPEGs
necessarily
don't
think that
pay
this
as
is
well as derivatives
anyway. I don't
and
think this is the
trading against
climate where
cryptos.
you want to start rolling the dice with the legal stuff.
No, and I mean we can maybe tie this into Luna soon as well, but maybe we should tackle Arthur's blog post first because I don't know what you got out of it, but like what I got out of it is sort of like that he thinks the pumps are going to go back on, right? And I think I realized at some point, and he sort of expressed that too, that you can't. I mean the fiat money printing pumps, and I realized at some point that they won't be able to turn the pumps on until they have inflation in check, right? But his view was that the government would start buying bonds pre-election to stimulate the economy, and so I guess the Fed balance sheet is just gonna deteriorate. I don't know, but what was your sort of main takeaway from his article? Because it was a bit scrambled. There was like a lot of different topics he sort of touched on.
Yeah, I agree with you. This might be confirmation bias because it is the same thing that I told you about a couple calls back, that I thought that near the midterm election they were going to start trying to make things look better. And I remember that I also mentioned that I didn't think that this was going to be something as overt as basically just airdropping people money, that it was going to be some other subtler way that doesn't look like they're just going crazy with the printers. And the suggestion that mentions about bonds would line up with that. So I got the same thing as you. Again, might be confirmation bias in my case because I was already expecting kind of that. His targets seem slightly optimistic. His immediate targets for bottom seem slightly optimistic, but hey, maybe he's right and I'm wrong.
Yeah, I've sort of tentatively come to the view that the currently it feels to me like there exists this general sentiment, not just in crypto, in the macro world as well, that like we're maybe not at the bottom, but well on our way to the bottom. And I've I've sort of started to think that somehow psychologically people still haven't internalized that most likely the rate hikes will continue. So even if we take all this thinking around like how they're going to save the election stuff as a given, before they can do much of anything, they need to get inflation under control. Like we're talking Estonia inflation in the last month, as I recall, was 20%, which is like, you know, insane numbers. Insane. And so that needs to be tackled before they can really move on anything else. And the only tool they have at their disposal right now is rate hikes. as far as I can tell. And so when I would assume somewhere in like early next year, when it becomes clear that the rate hikes are not one-offs, they are a trend, which historically makes sense, right? If you look interest rates over time, like it's not like it doesn't go out like this and then it's flat and then it comes back down, right? That's not what happens. It sort of fluctuates. And given the severity of the inflation, I suspect they're going to have to continue doing that for quite a while. And I think when the market realizes that, the sort of resulting fear will be like I think it's and Arthur does touch on this to a degree, but his timelines I think are a little bit muddled because this stuff doesn't play out in months. It plays out over, I guess, a year or even years, depending on the situation. And I think as things are going to get a lot worse from here. But I also think that the moment they can, they're gonna, stimulate the economy, of course. I mean, in some ways,
Yep.
central banking right today, the sort of post-modern central banking, I like to call it, is is like when it used to be sort of like make a little tweak, let things go, and then it's sort of you need another little correction, do another little correction. Now it's like all gas or all brake all the time.
Mhm. Yeah, it's governments have forgotten what a scalpel is. Now they only use broadswords.
That's a strange analogy, but okay. I guess okay. So surgery, sure.
This again, confirmation bias. This lines up with what I told you that I expected, which was that it wouldn't surprise me if Bitcoin is like at 70K and then crashes suddenly to below 20, right? Just because money comes in briefly and people get overly excited. If they do end up going the bonds route, and this is not going to be distributed across the population in the same way that it was before, we might end up getting a cantillon effect kind of thing going, where some areas of the economy benefit more than others, and those are able to employ people, but people decide not to do crazy stupid shit with their money, like put it into Elon Samo Mars coin or something. But remains to be seen.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is just a random note, but it is a real shame that when we have moments in which humanity just sort of dumps money all over the place, so little of it ends up going to things that are worthwhile. Like, it doesn't you don't need like a magnifying glass to be like, well, this is shit and not helpful. But I don't know. I'm fully on in the boat of like if we're gonna start dumping money somewhere, like there's only really like we need to go to the moon. That's I think my like short term thing. And I don't mean to the moon in prices. I mean like physically we need a moon base. And like if we're gonna do something like instead of Shiba, let's do that. I've been this old, I don't know if you've heard this, but it's this this idea that goes around crypto every now and then is like we should just send like a private key with $1 billion somewhere really far away. And I actually really like that idea. Like at some scale, that will be viable for the crypto community to do. I mean, it's already viable now, but probably people are going to be suffering a bit too much. You need to like time it so it's like peak bull market or something, and then I mean, and then you have the issue of like, okay, you send it there, and tokens all crash, and it's not worth anything. But if you could like just have, I don't know, like a metal plated like thing with a recovery phrase for a wallet that has $1 billion, and you could somehow guarantee that no one's compromised it, and you could send that to the surface of the moon, someone would go there like straight away. It sounds it sounds crazy because a billion isn't like that much money compared to like, I don't know, NASA's decades long budgets. But as like a return for going, like to justify the cost of going, Like we're gonna go even if there's no cost, hopefully. I mean, sorry, no reward for going at some point. So we might as well make it worth people's while, right? Send it up there. And like Elon would take off within like a week.
I think for him it'd probably need to be more than that. He likely gets a lot more than that from subsidies right now. It's maybe a few years ago. The
No, but
but
it's the PR. It's the PR and like everything else. Like honestly, what you should do, like this could even work this way, is that you just sent a wallet and then you made it public the address of that wallet and just let people
uh,
send, right? Like how much is the crypto community willing to pay to have a physical moon base? Fuck this whole like when moon is the right question, but the context is wrong.
okay, that's
A
fun, but it's also a little
bit
bit
of a tangent.
quaint. No, it's also a little bit quaint because the goal is that we need to establish a moon base. This doesn't mean that anybody's going to establish a moon base. At the best case scenario, it means somebody's going to go there and come back.
Yeah,
And that's something
fuck
that
it.
they actually
Let's just
go
go
there.
again. I don't even care. Just I mean, I guess someone's gonna send like a robot and then it's gonna
That's what I was going to say. You send a probe and flip over if it fell on the wrong side and then just read the plague and congratulations.
Well, if nothing else, send the package with like a bunch of cameras and hope that there's like a probe war.
See that's actually what we might get. We might get an arms race on unmanned probes and cheap unmanned probes for exploration, which could
With
still be
weapons.
valuable for humanity, right? Hey man, but you
uh,
did say we're gonna talk about Luna, so we're kind of like in Luna.
I feel like there's an inspiring story here in the physical world. And I think all this it comes from like I recently I've been thinking a lot about like what does it actually mean to like start integrating into the real world. And I have a lot of thoughts on that because and this is maybe related to just like a lot of our previous conversations around privacy and regulation and money laundering and all this stuff. I sort of have tentatively come to the conclusion that as crypto is or blockchains are right now, they cannot be integrated into the real world. It doesn't. It doesn't like that. There's sort of like an isolated science experiment that functions by its own rules, and that was obviously the whole point, right? Is you want it to be isolated from everything. That is why Bitcoin survived this long is because it kind of didn't touch much of anything in the real world. But as we start to like actually put this stuff to use, I think the first thing that we're gonna lose is permissionlessness. And then that sort of begs the question of like, okay, if we lose permissionlessness, then what do these systems even look like? And I think that like there's this utopian vision for a permissionless one single global system that we can all use, right? But but the reality of humanity all throughout history is that that's just not how things work. And when we integrate into the real world, if we are to integrate into the real world, we're gonna have to make concessions on that. And you know, that will mean a loss of technical freedom that will, I think, feel quite shocking for us who've been in the industry for a long time.
It sounds like you're coming around to my pessimistic perspective about the ghettoization of privacy, basically. How
Yes.
basically anything that is actually independent will be shunted off to a corner and let allow to stay there and play with itself, and any other independent chains that may want to bridge it to it or something and get, somebody's going to attack it for shits and giggles because the power and the stake is going to be elsewhere, but it's only going to be the ones who actually bend over and play by the rules of the real world that actually get used.
Yeah, exactly. And this is related to our previous discussion on sort of the direction that EU regulation is going in and so on. And while it's sort of a shame. I do think that how would I put this sort of like carefully so that I don't completely so that I don't completely make myself like I guess the way to think about it, or the way that I like thinking about it, is that it when you accept certain things, and okay, like there's probably arguments for why permissionless decentralized blockchains as they are now could work. I personally don't see it long term anymore, but I think that there's also a significant design space that is almost completely unexplored because we've had such a binary, like, centralized and decentralized systems, right? Like if things are no longer permissionless, you can start to think about, like, the moment you drop the permissionless requirement, you can start to think about, like, practical ways that people in the real world can use these systems. And that's sort of exciting, even though it's going to help, governments have more and more control. But that's also like a design question to some extent. And so I have this little voice in my head, like somebody, like a more libertarian leaning person should be the one designing them, so that we get a system that still maintains at least some of the freedoms that sort of that underpin the blockchain industry.
That sounds like an extremely worthy and neutral way of trying to say that there's a fascinating design space in the combination of CBDCs and corporate blockchains.
CBDCs are a bit different. I mean, of course, the design space for CBDCs is incredible, right? It's just that it's not it's not
It's
going to
going
be
to be
used.
designed by governments who are not
It's good.
known for the quaint design principles.
No, no, it's unlikely to be an elegant system. I don't know if you've read this book, Seeing Like a State. It's really good. It is sort of like, maybe not in one sitting, but it basically just charts like why how like the existence of states has transformed the real world into suiting its needs. So they have all these like really funny examples, like, it used to be that people were like, there was like a forest and it was like this thriving, diverse ecosystem, and whatever, and then a state comes along and is like, okay, well, like, let's cut down the entire forest and just plant a ton of the highest yield tree in like neat rows so that we can keep track of like everything, we can get it into our books easily. And then because the biodiversity gets destroyed, the whole like forest just like collapses. It doesn't yield anything. But then all the people that were responsible for sort of orchestrating this get promoted, and it just happens again and again because it makes the state's job easier in terms of tracking. And the same thing
Yeah.
applies to taxes and all these other things, right? Like, I think it was a Slate Star Codex blog post on sort of referencing this book that talks about taxes, and how, like, at one point in time collecting taxes was like very, very difficult because you had like 90% of the population was called Bob or something, and they didn't have surnames. So, so they had to come up with like all these weird things. And the French, I think it was the French, had like this is the story that many people have heard. They had this thing of like, they tax you based on how many windows and how many doors your house has, because they figure that, the bigger the house, the more they would be. And so then all the like poor people built these houses that had no windows and no doors. Anyway, so I think that general trend is definitely a thing, and that's why CBDCs are not going to be interesting, and they're not going to allow for innovation, because innovation is chaotic, and innovation is like more entropy than it is structure. But on the on the sort of private, I guess, side, I think the design space is vast, and whether they're corporate chains or I don't even know if this is possible, but like geographically constrained sort of permissionless chains or like whatever, like there's all kinds of things that you can do that opens a lot of interesting doors. But I think the primary thing is going to be that everyone needs to be KYC'd, and then we have this whole like new privacy concern.
Yeah. Sadly, that is pretty much the ghettoization of privacy that I've been worried about for a couple of years, combined with things now looking significantly shittier worldwide than they did when I started worrying about this. First of all, and before I forget, this thing that you mentioned about governments and people getting promoted because they show up and ream entire forests to make fields and whatnot reminded me of a quote by George Bernard Shaw that usually gets taken in a very positive context, let's say, which is that basically the reasonable man adapts himself to the circumstances, whereas the unreasonable man twists the world to adapt to him. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man.
Hmm.
This is very much of an entrepreneurial rah-rah quote usually, but what we tend to forget is that governments are even more unreasonable than anybody else, and they have the armies to back it usually, or they have the guns at the very least.
Well,
So it shouldn't surprise us in the tech space that governments bend what we create to their own expectations, right?
yeah, yeah, well, that's an, I don't know if governments are unreasonable. I think they're just like automatons, inefficient automatons with badly coded rules that become like outdated in a fraction of their real lifespan, right? Like
Yeah. You're saying that they're not unreasonable. You're saying that they are unreasoning.
they're unreasoning and sort of by definition, because it really is just a codification of rules, they're they're like inhumanely literal about applying them, and changing them is more than just a social movement sometimes. Like I had this thought experiment that I came up with. Like if somebody private was able to orchestrate a nationwide vote for something, um completely unofficial, so not like government sanctioned or anything. I wonder if governments would even let you do this. They might try to stop you. I don't know. But if you did like a nationwide vote, and the majority of the nation, as calculated by this some verifiability, like you need to be able to verify that it's actually true. But if it was like definitively that the majority of the nation wanted something in a democracy, would that lead to that thing happening?
Nope, actually, and I can give you an example. In Catalonia, basically Barcelona, I can't go for just Barcelona. They try to vote on Catalonia in general, but basically they try to hold an unofficial, non-binding referendum a few years back for if they should go independent from Spain. And the government actually sent in troops to stop people from voting. So yeah, they wouldn't even let you hold it if they think that they're not going to like the potential answer.
Yeah. It's kind of funny though, right?
And
It makes me
hello
want to
from Spain.
orchestrate it makes me want to orchestrate a vote. On just some like absurd topic, you know? Just
Yeah, that's the
like
thing. If it's an absurd topic, like everybody should wear their underwear outside of their pants or something, like, yeah, sure, go vote, knock yourself out. They just
but
want
by
something
law,
practical.
by law.
Yeah, they're gonna let you vote, and it's gonna be non-binding because it doesn't conform to the rules of whatever. And fine, just go knock yourself out.
Well, but what is the purpose of democracy if not to establish what the majority want?
It is not to establish what the majority wants.
Well, the purpose of democracy is to establish what the majority wants. I think the question is that we're getting to
That's
here
not
is
true.
that
The,
like,
the purpose of
are
majority
any of
is
these
that the purpose of majority is to let people feel that they have a voice on things, but that doesn't actually end up defining what happens. I don't know of any country
that's
that is actually
representative democracy.
Okay, do
but
you
you know,
know of
most
any
places.
country that actually sets all their laws via direct democracy? So you're talking about chocolatism, basically.
Yeah, but it's kind of depressing, right? Like,
Kinda.
who's like, the sort of it's one of these things that, like, I don't know, if you smoke too much weed or something, you might like start the question of like who's really in charge, and it's not clear because I don't think our like political mechanisms actually, they don't do what they sort of are intended to do, but at the same time, it's also not purely a veil for like a plutocratic elite. Like, it's probably partially that, but it's not just that. And so, like, what the fuck is actually going on?
It's a chaotic system of parasites and opportunists, and I don't think that by and large anyone with any sort of idealism is likely to survive on that environment for long, because you are. I mean, I think I told you this. The reasons why I stopped believing in any sort of political involvement is because no matter what your ideology is, no matter, whatever principles you have, I don't care if I agree with them or not, right? There's going to be someone who only cares about power, and that person is going to win because they're willing to do something that the person who cares about principles is not. So who's in charge? It's going to depend on the system. Some are going to be more plutocratic, some are going to be mostly kleptocratic. But it's by and large not the people who vote.
Yeah, I guess the only thing standing between anyone and power is his ethics or morals.
Yes. I mean, if you look at votes, basically, what happens on during a vote on a recall, the main reason why votes act as a threat for politicians is basically because they say, if you don't at least do a little bit of stuff that I like, then I'm going to put somebody else in to steal instead of you, right? You're not gonna get to continue filling your pockets. It's gonna be Jack over
Oh,
here.
that's an interesting way of looking at it. So it's like someone's gonna be a parasite anyway, and it's like a negotiation with the people who to some degree have the power to dictate who gets to be the parasite.
Yep. It's basically take us to your lizard.
Yeah.
Have you read that bit from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? The whole thing is a discussion between, if I recall correctly, Ford Perfect and Arturo Ten about the political system of a planet that is ruled by lizard people. Basically, it's
Mhm.
like regular humans or whatever on the planet, and there's lizard people who oppress and devour the humans, and I don't recall what else. And then there's this whole argument about Arthur doesn't understand, but is it like a tyranny? No, no, it's a democracy. Like, people actually vote for the lizards. Like, what? Like, why are you gonna go and vote for a lizard person? Well, because otherwise the wrong lizard might get in.
Yeah. Yeah,
But that,
I
that, that that's what we have basically. We have a whole bunch of lizard people, and the best thing you can do is threaten that you're gonna fire them and put a different lizard in charge.
well, this is basically what a lot of people like express as the general motivation to vote. It is usually not expressed in those terms. It's more like, if you don't vote, this other person who is, morally bankrupt and just in general a crappy person is gonna put some other crappy person in charge. as if like, I don't like the whole premise of that is basically like there's like good smart people who are trying to defend the right way, and then there's these other bad people
And that
who
is
are
actually
trying
the
to get into power.
that is the very optimistic version. Like, most people are fully aware that this particular candidate is an asshole, but he is the asshole from the right party, right? As opposed to
Well,
that asshole that's from a
that's
different
true.
party.
Yeah, but
No,
it's
it,
true.
it
It's
gets
true to an extent. Yeah, but this party
the,
thing
the,
is weird. I don't like why the fuck do we have parties? I don't
It's gotten
get it.
it's gotten insane in the US. I was looking at a study a couple days back actually, which I had to go back and check the data because it was fucking insane. That basically, and this was specifically about the US. But if I recall correctly, like 40% of Republicans and 30% of Democrats would be, I can't recall if the expression was mad or extremely disappointed in their child if they married somebody from the opposite party. Like, this shit's a cult now. It's not even politics anymore.
But well, I mean, come on, the US is different. I think I
The
was
US
in
is a
New
bell.
York. I
The
was in
US is
New
a
York when
bellwether.
Trump got elected, and like people were like running out of offices crying, and like the whole city shut down because the other guy was elected. And I was like,
It was a
wow,
very particular.
I've
It was a
never
very particular lizard.
that's true. And like, obviously, like if anyone was able to instill a sense of existential dread in the Democrats, Trump was that guy. But just a general situation where like in Finland, and I mean this is not strange, I guess, but in Finland, I've never come across anyone who's that passionate about getting any particular person in or out of power. Like there's one like populist guy who was sort of rode the like Trump populist wave a little while before Trump, and had some strong views on immigration and whatever. And that was controversial.
From years.
Well, strong views in the sense that like as far as I recall, was primarily just saying like we shouldn't be taking immigrants like willy-nilly. But then his party members, some of them were a bit more on the like on the I don't know, the Nazi end of the spectrum.
Shoot them at the border end of the spectrum.
Right, right. Yeah. It's like, it's not so much about should we take immigrants, it's like, how should we dispose of them? But anyway, it's still like people just aren't that impassioned. But I guess, when things generally work, you don't have as strong of a belief. And then also a big part of it is that like the whole like it's fueled in the US. It's not like an accident
Yeah.
that people feel that way, and because like they're just bombarded with like propaganda basically on all sides, and they get riled up intentionally to do things. But yeah, take me to your lizard.
This actually relates to the other thing that I had mentioned, this concept of the jackpot by William Gibson. Basically, this he mentioned it. He mentions it on the peripheral originally, and I know this. But I think there's a couple other books on the series which I haven't read. But basically, it's this slow rolling apocalypse where a whole bunch of bad shit just happens at the same time. A pandemic, global economic collapse, famine, like everything just happens simultaneously.
This is from the
And
Bible.
yeah, well,
This is the end
kind.
of the world from the Bible.
The thing is, it doesn't necessarily happen all at once because it's a sort of rolling apocalypse, but suddenly all those things start like picking up speed, which kind of feels to me up to a point where we are right now. This book is about 12, 15 years old. The the issue that I have with it is basically, I think that I told you that if we are undergoing something, oh, and of course, after the jackpot, there's like the whole rise of kleptocracies, which again we already have in different places. The thing that that I keep being going having in mind is that if we are going to something like the jackpot, then basically principles turn you into meat. Like you're going to be the thing that others go after. And it basically feels, which is where it connects to the politics discussion that we're having. It basically feels like we're getting that same environment, but we're going to start getting it everywhere else. Like we had the environment where, as I mentioned, you have the person who cares about principles and the person who cares about power, and the person who cares about power basically eats everybody else. And this happened in politics, and up to a degree, it happened like in large enough organization, like say a corporate, because anything sufficiently large isn't distinguishable from a government. But I think this is going to start extending out to areas that insofar had been mostly untouched, like the crypto and tech scene as well. Like everything is going to get swept up in this whole mess. And I think we're in for a few years of eat or be eaten, basically.
I agree with that. And crypto crypto is in a let's sort of talk a little bit about just crypto's position in the world today, because I think it's actually it's in a really interesting place that to this degree I've never previously lived in a world where the majority of people in positions of power, no, I don't know majority, but a lot of people in positions of power now seem convinced that something like crypto is going to be the future. So this is in talking with big banks, talking, with big fund managers, talking with even government officials. They don't, obviously, a lot of them don't understand what it is today, and they don't know there's this, process of like attaching it to the real world. But I think it's the first time where it's sort of like solidified that it's going to be here to stay. And then people are going to co opt it for their purposes in one way or another. At the same time, it's a very easy scapegoat for any problems because of how it's structured today, right? So, like, it's sort of the same thing as in the US elections. It's like Russian interference. And in light of the data, and, we don't know the actual truth. Maybe Russians interfered a lot, maybe not. But like, ultimately, like, just sort of, I guess, extrapolating from like the scale of the effort to have a meaningful impact on US elections, I think it's very unlikely that Russian interference had anything to do with the outcomes. However, it creates a very convenient excuse. And I think the same is true of crypto today. It was, in tandem with like, so like, are Russians moving money into Bitcoin and moving it abroad? And like, as if that was like, it's like such a weird thing. It's like we were trying to like kill these guys. Like, why? And you made this stupid permissionless currency that like might allow some of them to survive. What dickheads. But anyway, so there's that positioning, and it's sort of like it's like right on the edge. And it's never been there. It's always been too small, too inefficient, to everything to matter enough. It's just been proclaimed dead and blah blah. Nobody really cared. Let's try. Governments have basically had the approach of like, don't create global drug marketplaces, please, or we'll put you in jail. But beyond that, like, fuck it. But now it's sort of it's like simultaneously the biggest opportunity, like, not I mean, it always was kind of, but it is now well understood in many, many places and circles that it is probably the biggest opportunity to do something dramatic, hopefully positive, but it's also the biggest target. So, how do we kind of navigate that landscape?
We can't. They can't coexist. It's simple as that. Governments are not going to allow for something that removes control from their hands, particularly in a domain like money, where they think they're the only ones who are entitled to control it because they have gotten way too used to that idea. And I think, did we discuss back when they started saying like, oh, we should sanction Russians and not like remove Russians from Bitcoin exchanges and whatnot. I think we probably, I can recall if we did it on the video, but my hope, because the argument was like, oh, Russians are going to use Bitcoin to launder money, right? Like oligarchs are going to escape with their billions and launder money. And my position on that was fine. Let Russians use Bitcoin to escape the rubble. Just basically add withdrawal limits and fiat. Say, add a withdrawal limit of $500 a day, for instance, from an exchange. The average Russian doesn't have like 3,000 something dollars a month to withdraw. And for an oligarch, that is peanuts. So you would basically allow people, and if you allow the average Russian to use Bitcoin, chances are they're not going to end up paying taxes on the stuff that they buy, which helps defund the government, right? So you allow average Russians to defund the government. You don't need to go ideology. Maybe they would ideologically support Putin or whatever. But most people, even when they ideologically support the president, don't like to part with their money unless they're forced to.
Or stars.
So, yeah. So you would give them an option to opt out of the Russian economy while not helping out the plutocrats and the robber barons that for whom again a $500 withdrawal limit is like you might as well be saying you get to withdraw 50 cents a day. The reason why they were never going to take that approach is because what you're saying is basically that it is valid for people to escape their governments financially when their governments are no longer serving them.
I don't know, right? Like this is the big, I think, ethical question and also problem when it comes to permissionless systems is like if you're in a situation at this point in time, and these things change over time, if you're in a situation right now where your government is not abusing you, at least not so badly that like you feel it's justified to try to escape, then then there then permissionlessness only really increases bad behavior in your environment, or not increases, but like it only serves bad actors kind of from the
So what
government.
you're saying,
But if you're in a
not
country where the government is not very nice, then obviously like you want that ability. And so there's like
it's not about if the government is beating you with a stick or not. I mean, the whole name for government employees is public servants. They are supposed to be serving you. If they are not serving you, then there's no reason why you should be forced to pay them. Now, take the Russian case,
but
right?
but we
Let's just
but we've just discussed the realities of governance structures in the real world.
sure.
And so
Well,
obviously that that while that is the ideal view of what a government should do, it's not actually what happens. Like I'm sure there are a lot of well-meaning people in government trying to do positive things, but ultimately as an organization, it doesn't actually like if it had a priority list, I don't know that serving the public would actually be number one on many governments' priority lists.
yes, and that's the problem. But that for what sort of, I agree with you. I don't think that this is how governments see it. Or maybe they think that, oh, I am serving them by doing the thing that I'm doing. In the vast majority of cases, I disagree with. But what you said was basically, I think it was the code that this was more of a moral or principle question. And to me, it's not a principle question. Like the principle is they're supposed to serve you. They may see it differently, but the
No,
principle is that they're supposed to serve you.
yeah, so let me clarify. As a builder of permissionless systems, there is an interesting ethical dilemma involved in order if you build something that allows people to circumvent bad governments, you also allow people to circumvent good governments. And thus it will be viewed exclusively from a negative perspective because zero
I agree.
governments will like it.
I agree. That's why I say that they can't coexist.
Yeah.
But this is just a bullshit excuse, right? Like people pay taxes on their crypto in Germany. I recall that a few months back, we were talking about how much of a mess it was to calculate some Uniswap transactions so that you could pay taxes on them, right? Because you pay taxes, right? People use these things and pay taxes and are happy to contribute while the government is not beating them with a stick or in other ways, this putting them as a terrible disadvantage, right? The the thing that I'm saying is that the main reason is actually we're saying the same thing, which is basically the main reason why no government would suggest average Russians should be able to escape the rubble with crypto is because this is sanctioning that behavior that may be applied to them in the future.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
they
exactly.
can't coexist.
Exactly. Exactly. I am confident that there are middle grounds that are possible, but maybe we don't need to dive too much deeper. We're getting I think this podcast is becoming a political philosophy podcast. So political
That's
amateur political philosophy is maybe more accurate.
no, it's an opinion piece, and everybody's allowed to have
Yeah.
opinions. No,
Well, are they? Not in all
the
countries.
the thing is, well, the thing is, you are touching on something like we could just discuss Luna, right? But Luna's a shit show, and everybody knew it was going to tank again the moment that they opened. It's like
But they
definitely
didn't.
when people.
That's the thing. They did not. There were people fucking shilling it. And it's like,
Okay,
guys, they're giving these people a portion of the supply who just lost a fuck ton of money. What do you think those people are gonna do the moment this thing is liquid? They're gonna fucking sell everything they can. And alas, that is
for
exactly
what
what
is
happened.
yeah, for what it's worth, I'm sure that there were some people who thought that this thing was actually going to go to the moon now. However, if you look at it purely from a selfish strategy standpoint, if you hold a fuck ton of Luna and you're going to be airdrop Luna, what you're going to do is shield the shit out of it so that maybe other people hold and don't sell before you, right?
Yeah, exactly. But well, yeah, this is exactly the thing, but it's so transparent, and what pains me is that it works. Like from a purely selfish standpoint, the most I think that they could have recouped in losses, the people that lost on Luna, like they did. Like this was the best outcome for those individual investors who lost a lot of money if they were able to sell, you know, something
Immediately.
immediately. Yeah. Like somebody was managed to sell at like 17, $18. Now it's 2.8.
Yeah, it's better than I expected, actually. I hadn't checked it in a while.
I mean, it's another funny chart, right? It's like starts up here and then it goes bang, and then it's pretty much flat. But yeah, Luna, I don't I get like maybe this is related. So sorry to draw this back to what you just said. Like everybody knows, like right, that everybody does know, and we should touch on these things. But I do find the kind of meta analysis more interesting personally, and I don't find a lot of content that goes into that as such. And obviously, we don't know what the fuck we're talking about, so like nobody should really even listen to us, but having conversations about it, I think is interesting and helpful in the long term. And I have in my notes the Beyond the Web post by Dominic Tarr, which you sent to me. And as I said, I read it like I read it on my phone, and his name was kind of small there, so I didn't realize it. I was like, I really agree with this guy's thinking. Like, who wrote
That's
this?
weird. Where the hell did this guy come from?
I know. I'm like, like, who is it? What the fuck is this sock and supply thing? And then I go up, I scroll up, and oh, it's Dom. Right. That's why. Okay. But so for people who don't know, Dominic Tarr, he's the creator of a thing called Secure Scuttlebutt, which which I'm a big fan of. It's not, it's like a distributed social media platform, I guess, is one way to think about it. There's no token, there's no blockchain, blah, blah, blah. It's just you send
Clearly
messages
peer
and
to
they go
peer.
through, yeah, they go through other people. The way, I don't know if you like in some of the original kind of descriptions of it, they did like an unbelievably poor job of explaining what the fuck it is. And like I know what it is because I've had many conversations with Dominic and Andre Staltz, who's one of the main developers, and you know, whatever. But they described it as a digital sneaker net, which is just
I heard that
like
one actually.
that is not a good way.
It is an excellent description. It's just not a good way to sell people on it.
Well, right, like it is very accurate, but it for most people, it does not give a picture of what it is.
Yeah.
Because like how many like non weird nerdy people know what a sneaker net is, right?
I mean, even weird, nerdy young people might not know what a sneaker net is.
Well, nowadays they don't. They're
Yeah.
like people, I guess like 80s, 90s internet children
Let,
might know what a sneaker net is.
so
Maybe we should
let's
explain it.
yeah, let's explain that for people who are listening. What the fuck is this couple weirdos talking about? The okay, so basically, sneakernet was a term for back when what you had were really slow network connections, and you actually needed to transfer large files. What you did was that you put them on a floppy or something, and then you just gave it to someone who put on their sneakers and gave it to somebody else. So that's why it was called a sneakernet, because the walking around was the primary method of transferring information. Now, why Secure Scuttlebutt is called a digital sneaker net is because it is completely peer to peer. So if the entire internet were to go down tomorrow, let's say, and you just have local networks, it is perfectly possible that you could just transfer information by gossip when people end up meeting until it eventually reaches its destination, and the information is encrypted so that only the final target can see it, but anyone who's connected along the way gets basically a copy of all the stuff that the other one is carrying. So that's why they refer to it as a digital sneaker net.
It's like an apocalypse social media,
Yeah,
right? That's like the way
an
I think
apocalypse
it's
resistant social media.
and when they first explained this to me, I was like, okay, so let me just understand this. In order for this to function with any degree of efficiency, what you need is for me to be on the same Wi-Fi with another person. And if I'm sending a message from Finland to Ricardo in Spain, so there needs to be some person who consistently travels between mine and Ricardo's Wi-Fis, which is very specific when you think about it. I think the most likely person to travel between mine and Ricardo's Wi-Fis is either me or Ricardo, but
Now, to their credit, it currently it supports pubs, which basically like central servers that can help with the
yeah,
specific Finland Spain connection issue. But yeah, it does have that
and
design issue. Of course, this was designed by somebody who lives on a boat. So
yeah, I don't know if Dominic lives on a boat anymore, but I
oh,
struggle to see him at like probably he does. I mean, I don't even know. He's definitely not a land faring creature. That doesn't even make sense. But yeah, he lives on a boat in New Zealand. He also maintains a shit ton of open source software, so he's like an unsung hero in that respect. I mean, pretty. I think at some point, we should there should be like a parade for all the open source maintainers.
the key thing with the boat is relevant is because this is not just an apocalypse tool. This is a tool that is useful in situations where you can't rely on connectivity being there the whole time, right? A boat being one of those cases. But if you're someone who's collecting data for a particular tribe somewhere and your internet access point is an 18-hour walk away, this would be a perfect tool for that as well.
Yeah, so I have to be honest. We can talk a little bit more about Scuttlebutt soon, but I have to be honest. I'm much more on board with the Starlink approach to solving this issue than the sneaker net approach. To be to be fair, I'm, I'm a lazy Westerner. I'm not. I don't want to. I can barely be bothered to like go turn on and off my Wi-Fi box if something goes wrong. I just switch to my mobile hotspot.
These two are calibrated for different types of dystopian scenarios.
Yeah.
Basically, the
Well,
Starlink.
Starlink will most likely cease to work in a dystopian scenario, right? Because it needs centralized control.
Actually, that's what I was saying. Starlink is the cyberpunk dystopian scenario of mega corporations controlling everything, and no matter where you are, they're gonna find you. Starlink SSB is more the wasteland. The whole world has balkanized
Mad
dystopian
Max.
scenario. So they're completely they're basically optimizing for different things.
It is a bit concerning. So if you read sci-fi and you don't think that concepts sort of discussed in sci-fi are completely bonkers and we're never going to be in that kind of environment, then this is maybe not for you. But if you do believe that, like if you do believe that we're going to be interplanetary, we're going to be sort of ultra connected everywhere, we'll be chipped and so on, Elon Musk is positioning very well for that world, and it's also very concerning because if that world does come to be, he's going to own most of the infrastructure, and I'm not very happy about that. I think his intentions by and large are good, although he's a bit flaky on
A
some things.
bit.
But it's
He's a man
I
child.
yeah, he is. But at the same time, there's a benefit to people at least being honest about how childish they are to some degree, right? Because most crazy things humans do are sort of like childish stuff. Like most of the most terrible and the greatest things are like some, you know, Egyptian king just putting his foot down, like, I want a bigger building. And then they throw human blood and suffering at it until it happens. And it was all for nothing. But at the same time, it is a testament to our
Hey,
ability to do crazy things.
it still brings a lot of tourism, and there's a McDonald's right across from it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you take the nihilistic sort of approach, it's or viewpoint on this sort of stuff, then it's just as meaningful as everyone else or everything else, right? And it's at least something we still talk about and are like, wow, that was how the fuck did they do that? like, every now and then there's
Yeah,
some guy who's like,
lots and
could we
lots of
build
that.
pyramids now? It's like, well, yeah, we could. It's you just move some stuff around. It's not that hard. But back then, it was it was like, okay, every block that is transported from here to there requires a human sacrifice of 3 people.
You know what? Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder what sort of environmentalist red tape you would have to go through to build a pyramid. Now, like, have you done like the water table study? Like, oh, you can't get all the stones from this place because there's a particular type of San Marsupio that only lives there,
Yeah.
so you can't get the stones.
In Finland, whenever there's a building project that like the neighbors don't want to happen, there's always you find the feces of an endangered squirrel. It's the one specific endangered squirrel that just goes and shits everywhere where they want to build something like a little too large for the local inhabitants to stomach. But again, childish shit, right? Like, this when you look at it from a high level, it's all just petty quarrels and so on. Somebody trying to profit and other people defending, sometimes reasonably, sometimes unreasonably, their view or something. Yeah. And I sympathize with this. If there's like at an apartment I lived in, there could have been a sea view, but there was a very large tree in front of my sea view. Now, if I didn't have like the risk of going to jail for just cutting that tree down, I 100% would have done that. And so people like it's very easy to be sort of think altruistically on a high level, but then in your like local min max situation, you optimize for your own needs. Anyway, we've digressed again.
What else is new?
So, but we should discuss the socket supply thing by Dominic. So, what did you take away from it? I need to just glance at it
I
again
man,
because I read it at some. So, but he wants
yeah,
to use WebAssembly as like a standard platform for everything, so that e- every program can basically just be a web view that runs WebAssembly, and you can do it pretty light and in terms of like doesn't require very heavy computation. What I don't quite understand is that like how does this become P2P,
I don't recall if I got that part. The
or
Frankly, it
does it?
seemed to me a little bit of a implementation digression with just like, oh yeah, and then we can also do this usual P2P stuff,
I
right?
guess it's more like, this can be the generic OS that we've been looking for, right? So I mean, and this has been attempted many times, but like the ideal situation would be one in which whatever environment you're running a program in or anything is always standardized. It always functions the exact same way, and so you can like a single code base can work on all platforms. Is the dream, right? And like Facebook tried to go in that direction with React. They had React Native. All this stuff keeps suffering from, well, a lot of different problems, but I think the primary problem is the platform developers are always like very annoying. Like the Apple and Google, they like don't they have no interest in creating any sort of like standards around anything. And so if everything was just a web view, you could have that standard environment to run everything in. And it would make developing applications easier. And you because it's WASM, you could basically use any programming language you want. And it's pretty performant. And it's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, the thing here is, and I this is not going to be the most optimistic thing that I have said today, and that is saying something considering all the other stuff I have said today. What the issue is that that's not what we're missing. Like we're not really missing a common execution environment because we've had several over the years. Like I mean, you had Java until it started diverging, right? And in theory, you could have. I mean, you find Java and freaking smart cards now and TV tops, TV set top boxes and stuff like that. Pretty much any machine out there can run Node or can run some version of JavaScript at least. So common execution environments we have more than enough. The issue is that peer-to-peer applications are hard to design and bring a certain amount of inconvenience and cognitive overhead, and the majority of people are not willing to put up with that. They just want the easy thing that just spins up and connects to whatever they want to connect and just get the stuff, and that's it. They want to have to think about considerations about, say, on secure scuttlebutt, am I storing stuff that I don't necessarily want to store for the people? Am I storing stuff that I disapprove of? This would actually be
Right.
an interesting conversation to get Samuel on because Sim and I have been working on distributed C. We've been going a little bit back and forth on this over and over. But
Or
basically,
well,
any
we should get Andre on as well. We should have one episode where we just get all the P2P people and then we shit on P2P for an hour and a half.
the thing is, I like P2P, right? But
Love
this,
it.
and I think that more applications should be local first, and more applications should work in a completely peer-to-peer manner. The The issue is that this brings complications that the vast majority of people don't want to have to worry about. And like in the case of Mapeo, for instance, this project by Democracy Earth Foundation, that's based on
Uh,
top of a modified, if I recall, it's based on top of the modified that protocol, and we actually gave them a grant way back when. Mapeo is a project where the users are more than happy to put up with whatever inconveniences peer-to-peer may cause, or with the cognitive overhead, because it is the situation that's supposed to work for tribes in a jungle completely offline until somebody goes off to sync stuff, right? They can't rely on satellites. They can't rely on Google Maps or any of that shit being available. So it is in a situation where people are willing to put up with the inconveniences of P2P. The vast majority of people give a fuck. They maybe they are happy if you reduce a little bit the connection load, but that's it, right? They don't really care.
there is something nice about P2P chat, though, even in developed worlds. There's something nice about knowing that the messages are like mine and going direct to the recipient.
For you who thinks about these things, like
I
I mean,
know, I know. Most people don't give a crap.
lots of people that I talk about actually think that Telegram is encrypted by default because they have done an excellent job of setting the security thing on their homepage, right? And people probably don't even think like, oh yeah, this is going to a server and bounce over who's knows how many places before my buddy gets it.
I mean, this is a big, big rabbit hole, but like even encrypted, end to end encrypted by default, I would not consider any of that to be secure, like including Signal. I love Signal. It's great. It's probably more overhead for like people to crack, but the the problem, like data in transit problem, is like not an issue, right? Encryption is sort of easy in that respect. The problem is that your device is probably fucked and like already compromised, or there's more zero-day exploits that are known than anybody even understands, and so on.
Yeah, and stuff is still completely mind blowing sometimes, and like out of a freaking science fiction novel. I mean, remember the iMessage exploit from how long ago was this? It probably wasn't even a year ago. That basically they sent an image to someone, and it took advantage of a bug in the image decoding process to bootstrap a virtual machine.
Really?
You haven't seen that? Man, that is the most insane exploit I have seen in my life. It was completely freaking bananas. Like I had to look for like three different
The
sources just to
oh,
make
it's
sure.
the NSO zero click exploit. Oh yeah, yeah, I did see this. Yeah, we were talking about
It
this.
was
Yeah.
insane. Like if you were to write that in some cyberpunk book, it's like bullshit. Like, it's like nobody's gonna go through that time. Like what sort of evil savant person do you need to go to to design this thing? And, like it's the kind of shit Skynet would put together.
Well, I mean NSO, right? Like
Yeah.
it's I think NSO is justly known as pretty much the most evil corporation on the planet. NSO is, I think it's an Israeli sort of hacking tools company. Basically, they sell to government agencies and other people, of course. They always in their announcements are like, "Oh no, no, we only sell to the U.S. pretty much, or the
Yeah,
West,"
they send it. They
and
send
it's
they
like, and then they keep popping up. Pegasus or whatever their main thing is, it just keeps popping up with like
yeah
all
in
over
the
the place.
telephones of dismembered journalists.
Right, right, yeah. But I mean, the Saudis are one of us, right? But yeah, I mean, and so one thing to be said though about that, like it, just because I think I've personally accepted that this is going to be sort of a philosophy podcast. This is the kind of thing where someone's going to do it, right? And like someone's going to do it and make a boatload of money and become a very powerful, impactful organization. And I'm sure whoever does it gets the full backing of whatever government they're under, and so on and so on. So from that perspective, so actually, this reminds me of another thing. This is
Not sure what the
uh,
argument is there. Is the argument somebody's going to do it? Why not me? Or
not why not me, but more like the ethics of doing that, from my perspective, are questionable. But then someone is going to do it anyway, and so I understand why someone does it. It's sort of like a it's the same as like all governments need to have an army kind of thing, right? Like someone needs to do it.
I disagree. If this were a situation where you think that somebody's going to build it, so it's better if it's under your control, then let's say that I can maybe buy that, and then you say, well, but I'm going only going to sell it to these people because these people do not dismember journalists, right? But
Oh,
then
right,
you
yeah,
go
yeah.
out
So
and
that
do business with all these other people. That's just basically you being a sociopath.
but this is the same as arms manufacturing to a large extent, right? Like it's
Yeah,
like of course you make it seem like you only do business with the good people, but generally guns end up in the hands of the people who use them. So like
sure.
eh, So, like, what's that? Lord of War, I think, tackles these things kind of in a fun way. But this reminded me of sort of a similar ethical thing. Do you know Palmer Luckey, the guy that started Oculus?
Yeah.
So he's a very controversial figure. And his new company is a defense contractor that makes drones that kill people.
Yeah.
And obviously, Silicon Valley tends to be more on the we shouldn't participate in defense. But I can also understand the arguments for doing so. Like if everyone else is doing it and the US is too woke to do it, that's not good for the US, right?
I'm not arguing that the US shouldn't do drones if somebody else is doing it. I'm just saying that it's not the business that I want to be involved in. And that if you get involved in that business, then the argument can be like, oh, somebody else is doing it, therefore I'm going to help kill people too. Right. Or therefore it is good for me to help kill people. At the end of the day, you're helping kill people. If you
So
particularly care
so
about
I
that, then cool.
so I agree. Ethically questionable. I wouldn't do it. But in this game theoretic problem, it's good that somebody does it, right? Like I don't want to be in charge of the Finnish defense, but I'm glad that someone is. Whether they have a different ethical view on things, maybe, but pure judgment on those sorts of things is often also not like a balanced way of looking at it, because in every circumstance where you're in a competitive environment, it's sort of the whole thing, like the douchebags win
Yeah,
because they're willing to
it is.
compromise on ethics. So you want some douchebags on your side, which
The
is a shame, but
I wouldn't necessarily assume that the American government is on my side, but
in this example,
the
no.
the key difference there is that you say Finnish defense, and this is a good example of degrees of things, right? There's a difference between defense and when was the last time that the US was actually invaded and had to defend its own territory? I don't think it was last week, right? So
you
these things are not going to be used like defending the New York land border.
you misunderstand the purpose of American defense. The purpose of
No,
American
I
defense.
don't. I'm Central American.
No, no, no. So there's different perspectives, right? The purpose of American defense, from my perspective, is to protect Europe.
No, ever since the Monroe Doctrine, the purpose of U.S. defense had been to defend the U.S. interest, period. And right now,
I know.
defending Europe is in its interests, right?
Of course.
But back
And it
but
is in
back
my
then,
interests to try to ensure that it remains in America's interests to
yeah,
defend Europe.
yeah, yeah. My point is that the things that Palmer Luckey is building are not defense. This is
No.
we want to murder people as efficiently as possible because the drone is cheaper than someone who might get shot and who took us 3 years to train.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's gonna happen anyway.
Sure.
Like we're going headfirst into dystopia.
I hear you. And I'm not saying as an immoral business, I'm not saying that he shouldn't be doing it. What I'm saying is that whenever somebody is involved in this particular type of business, like the Pegasus guys, which by the way, I do think that making business with people who's member journalists is immoral. But what I'm saying is that you do not get to pretend that you are not in the murdering people business. That is the business that you're.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. That's true. That's true.
I don't know if you sign up for the National Guard, right? If you sign up for the National Guard, you're in the job of defending your state or your country from invasions. Cool. If you sign up for the Marines, you're in the business of going elsewhere and shooting people in the head, right? Fine difference there. Did you see this thing that somebody has like reported 17 gigabytes of inside information from Telegram channels and whatnot? I
What?
didn't think of
Really?
this stuff. Yeah, like
No.
I'm
Like,
gonna
are
try
they
and
making
find
like
it.
threats or something?
Effectively, some online rando signed up to Twitter and basically posted this whole. Let me get the link right now and send it to you. He posted this whole long rant on effectively, I'm leaving crypto because this thing is successful, and through Telegram vulnerabilities, I have been able to acquire private chat, like chats from closed groups, basically from closed Telegram groups, where influencers are doing this and are planning how to screw people over. And like you have millionaires pretending to be Smurfs, and you have poor people pretending to be billionaires. And I'm going to release all this shit into a huge 17 gigabyte file. And this is the hash, so you can verify it when it comes out. Just sent you the
Oh
link.
my.
That I don't
My.
think it's real. Like the best description that I've read of this is somebody said that this sounds like a sensational way to get a whole bunch of high profile crypto people to download an unverified binary and start clicking on documents. So,
I'm sure there are a lot of people sweating about that.
yeah.
I
I,
mean,
and I,
yeah.
I actually hope my real wish here is that some of these people actually start clicking on documents and they get just a little bit compromised, just compromised enough so that we know who was worrying enough about it and stupid enough to click on random things.
Yeah. Granted, though, you would think those people would be smart enough to get like a burner laptop and do it,
You would. That's
but
why I
people
added
are
the dumb enough part.
surprisingly dumb, right?
That's why I added the dumb enough part. I would really love to see who's stupid enough to fall this thing, right? Get to a burner laptop, copy that into a virtual machine. Just figure something out, right?
I'm so well. Heck, on this topic of like exposing people, I know there people there have been some very heinous things that have been done in crypto, and I'm not like not that I have like any proof of anything or anything like that, but like having been in the industry for a long time, you just like for example, I think there's a very high chance that most hacks are inside jobs and that kind of thing. So like at some point this stuff is gonna start coming out. It's gonna look very bad. But hopefully you kind of hope that like the good stuff doesn't get taken down with them, right? And you can't really it probably isn't as targeted, right? So it probably will happen, but I think it's good. Like crypto does need a cleanup. It's pretty clear.
I don't disagree. I just don't think that the governments again are going to use a scalpel. I think they're
No.
going to come at it with a broadsword and everything is going to get fucked. Basically, they're going to say, "Oh, look, somebody lost their board ape. Therefore, we're going to disallow anything where we don't get to reverse the transaction." For instance, just to give you a silly example. You're gonna get everything KYC. You might even just get this crowdsourced glowbacks that you were worried about, basically, like a token power transaction reversion effect, token voted transaction reversion that you were so
They
worried
are
about.
happening. They are happening. It's so
Yep,
crazy.
it's bananas, and this is before governments get involved. We're starting to basically eat each other now.
Can
Uh,
you imagine like making like some bonkers amount of money on some speculative token, getting a huge tax bill, and then the consent the token holders just seize your money?
yeah,
I mean, it's not really funny if like if it's not justified, then it's very very bad. But like I think in most cases, probably it sort of is justified to some extent. But the problem is that people like even if like you'd want people to do that kind of thing when someone is like abusing a system. Like I'm sort of sympathetic to the people that pushed out Justin Sun from Steam, but at the same time, like if we look at what's happening in the world, right? Like mobs are going to start doing this for not, you know,
yeah.
heroic reasons,
And
and that's kind of
that's the
concerning.
thing. If you say that it is valid for, like, for instance, the case of the Juno Proposition 16, right? If you say that, this character, whomever they were, I don't remember, game Dierto, right? They were playing by the rules of the program that you created. Like, what do you want from them? Right? And now they're saying like, oh yeah, but he didn't play fair, therefore we need to claw this thing back. What basically this means is that the moment that I leave a door open and somebody abuses it, I get to go get the mob and beat them with a stick for whatever definition of abuse I can figure out that I like or don't like. Or you get screwed on your Uniswap LP position. Aha, get the mob.
What's going on with Solana?
Dude, I honestly have no idea. I was just with the Marinade team and we were discussing testing in general and how this thing happened. I'm not sure if anybody's aware, but like a week ago, Solana had to halt because basically a bug. The bug basically caused half of the network to believe that the other half was wrong, effectively. So there was no solution but to halt this thing and restart with a fixed version. And I think that one that's happened with Solana basically is a more general problem, that is that we have lost a lot of the lessons from the past. There there I can't recall who posted this, but there was something that, all those in technology, like all the 30 on their third lists are jokes. If you want to do something relevant, get me a list of 50 people over 50. And because we have really lost a lot of lessons. I was talking to them like, why the hell is going on here? Like, did you like do like box seating or something? And they were staring at me like, what's box seating?
Can I stop you here? This
Yes.
is what we're doing for a lot of networks with a project called Ziggurat. Is basically doing black box node testing. And so we're doing this for Zcash and probably going to suggest it to Solana. They seem to need it.
Please.
And like every time we do it, like it, especially on the P2P networking layer, for some reason, the P2P networking layer is treated as kind of like it sort of works, whatever, let's not touch it. And the amount of bugs is just insanity. Like it is perfectly possible today to bring down most blockchains, I would argue, most L1 blockchains, simply by constructing a custom node that shoots some like random shit into the network.
Right.
And that is insanity, but it's also a solvable problem, right? It just requires work. And unfortunately, it's not very like exciting work in that sense. Like that's why we're doing it, because the problem I think is that most of the foundation teams want to like build all the cool, exciting stuff. And then this is sort of like grunt work, like it's testing
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, box seating is something that your teams could be doing themselves. I'm sure if you've heard of the technique, and in case anybody else hasn't, like public service announcement, you should do box seating, which basically what you do is that if you have a team, like, I don't care how big the team is, right? It could be 3 people. And by God, I hope you're doing code review. And what you do is that you have someone coordinating this, and you pick every so often, you pick one person and you tell them you're going to see bugs. And the job of that person is that among other code that they're writing, they need to intentionally introduce non-obvious bugs into the code. And then they write down what they did and then they send it for a code review and testing and the whole thing. And say that they introduce 10 bugs and the code review and testing only find 3 of these bugs, then that basically means that you need to assume that of any other bugs you found during the process, you have only found 30% of the problems that are actually there.
Let's just quickly shit on security audits in crypto. Security audits in crypto, there's such a competitive market right now. Like it's a competitive market in the sense that there's so much demand and not a lot of supply. The quality is complete garbage. Like if you send code into a security to a security audit company, and we've worked with many of them, most of them, not most of them, but a lot of them. I've worked with most of them in many different contexts, and almost without fail, they fail to recognize the known bugs that you knew were there. This not even just bug seeding, just like realize after sending it that like, oh, there's a
Yeah,
bug,
we found
which
this
is
thing. I go shit.
which is usually the case, right? It's like you send the code over for your review and then like you're sleeping and at night you're like, fuck. So they never catch those. They definitely don't catch more elaborate bugs. And especially when it comes to smart contract security audits, because there's so many dependencies, like interactions with other systems quite often that can behave in weird ways because the audits are time boxed usually to like a few days. They just have no ability to get an understanding of both your system and all the different other systems that may be interacting with them. And so like it's a PR thing at this point in time in in crypto. There's very little of value in doing security audits from a practical standpoint. You just need that stamp of approval. I hope that changes at some point. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be considerably more supply so that they can actually take their time. The prices need to come down so that projects can actually reasonably pay like significant audits. And so I think that'll just take time. But it continues to be a great place to start a crypto related business because there's so much demand and it's pretty high margin. The problem is that it's very hard to find people who can effectively do that work.
But I hear you. And I agree with that. Uh, the thing is that doesn't. If we're going back to Solana, that doesn't strike me like that was the problem here. It is like, did you not run at this in a few nodes in parallel for a bit? Like, how did this thing
Dude,
not appear?
no, no, of course not. There's VCs that need to get their tokens. We're not
Uh,
we're not doing testing.
but again, with the Solana cases, that's
That
not it. Any VCs that invested in Solana are still locked. I think for like another year or so.
I know,
Whatever it is, the
but the pressure to get to mainnet for these projects is immense. And so they release like if you play video games, this is like, early access video games are always trash in terms of bugs. Blockchains by and large are considerably worse at launch. They like just fundamentally do not work. Th- the only thing they're aiming for is that looks like it works to people who would be developing on top of them because their incentive is to start building out the ecosystem far before the actual infrastructure is functional.
And again, this should not apply to Solana because it's already on a mainnet. You have the beta label on it,
Beta.
but I did okay. You remove the fucking beta label. Like, it's not like people are not putting money in because it says beta or that's stopping anyone. It's
Yeah.
there's
Like
basically
a
no
hundred billion
justification.
dollar beta.
Yes, my point is this is a mainnet. This is live. It's not like if you remove the beta, money is going to start streaming in and VCs are going to end up dumping their tokens. This was a procedure fuck up, basically. I imagine the people
Yeah.
involved are tired and are stressed. But again, I'm
They're
sure that
quite
there could
they're
be somebody
from
who
my interactions with the Solana Foundation, I'd say that they're quite busy.
I'm sure.
One thing I will say though, is sort of in defense of Solana, and yeah, like, there's always like a perfect way of building these things, but when you build something that's this new and different and unarguably only really Solana, Polkadot, and Cosmos have built anything really new and different. I mean, this is
It,
the same
it,
thing with Internet Computer, which by the way we've just looked at. We did a tech due diligence on it, and they have made some very, very interesting design decisions. I would highly recommend taking a look just because it is a radically different approach to what decentralized systems might look like. We can maybe discuss that on the next episode or something. But anyway, Solana is like partially these things are like, bad engineering, bad design, whatever. But ultimately, they are trying to do something very different and they're handling volumes that are much larger than anyone else. And so things are bound to break more because other blockchains just don't run into these same issues. Like there's just not as much strain on other blockchains because they've been severely limited in order to avoid these kinds of issues. So then, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like if you think about it from like an iteration standpoint, if you don't run into these kinds of issues, then you'll never have the solutions for them. Like this sort of science experiment, we design the perfect system in isolation. I don't think that works in the real world. And so I'm quite bullish on Solana in the long term in the sense that like they are the ones that are like coming across these issues, understanding them and fixing them. And once they are fixed, they will have like ultimately, hopefully, the most stable version or like system that can do this kind of throughput. And no one else will have that at that point because there's no one else is really even trying right now.
I look, I agree. I like Solana. It's my main chain of choice right now.
Would
I
you
I
say
agree
you're
when it.
Solana Maxi?
No, I'm not a Solana maxi. Mario used to joke around about me going full maxi, but I guess to measure to be a pretty much anything maxi. I am I am
I
starting
do
to
think we should try to brand you as like the leading Solana Maxi. I think
the
that'd be
leading
funny.
Solana maxi. Okay, the I wonder. I'm trying to remember if I've met any Solana maxis. Maybe I've just gotten good at cutting maxes out. Anyway, I, I hear you when it comes to things like having to deal with how the botted mints bring the network down. Like that is
Yeah.
definitely a case of having to deal with the truth. This nonce thing was a bug, and fine bugs happen. Point is that I do think that blockchains, particularly blockchains with a relatively steady release schedule, like up to a point Solana is, right? We don't get new Ethereum versions every other week or something. Blockchains base layers with a steady release schedule need to take a page of all the stuff that we were doing in financial systems 20, 25 years ago, because you can't just be doing the cowboy thing, which is one approach. And the second is you can't afford to take 5 years for a release like Ethereum does, or whatever they take. Um,
Well, this is exactly why they should come to equilibrium and pay us so that we can be in their release process and make sure that everything is okay. I'm not aware of any other company in the world right now that does basically like full node audits. Maybe there are some, I'm sure there are, but that's something that we are quite good at.
And for all our patient listeners that have reached up to, that have stayed us with up to this point, you have just put up with about 2 hours of politics for a sales pitch.
But I mean, it's a nice way to do it, right? Like you have the ads knowing that no one will ever see them.
And if anybody reaches you, like, yeah, might as well go check him out. Fuck it.
Yeah, yeah.
In for a penny.
Yeah, bring them in with the political philosophy,
Uh,
monetize them with the security audits.
And that is one extremely specialized audience.
Yeah, I think that would be a poor business strategy. But this is the real thing, and we do like the what you said is exactly right. Like basically blockchain builders need to start functioning like real companies, right? Release schedules, code freezes, QA,
Look,
things like that.
like it or not, you're not even running a bank. You're running a banking network.
Yeah.
You should be bringing in at the very least the principles of banks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, shall we wrap it here unless
But
we need to promote something else? Like, I don't know, Uncle
uh,
Joe's Taco Shack?
I yeah, I'm very set on never owning or running a restaurant. I like when I move around in the world and I there's all these wonderful services that people provide and whatever, and I appreciate greatly the ones that do a really good job. And then I always think, my God, this is like so much work and logistics and stuff when I can just sit at home on my computer and, shit on P2P stuff. Anyway, let's wrap up. We'll see you next week.
Okay, man, take care. Ciao.
You too. Bye.